Okay, welcome back to part 2 of this video. Another dramatic technique, as it were, is the inspector's big finish. You can see here, I won't read all of it there, but perhaps just the second half. This is his final speech. But just remember this, one Eva Smith has gone, but there are millions and millions and millions of Eva Smiths and John Smiths still left with us, with their lives, their hopes and fears, their suffering and chance of happiness all intertwined with our own lives and what we think and say and do. We don't live alone. We are members of one body. We are responsible for each other. And I tell you that the time will come when if men will not learn that lesson, then they will be taught it in fire and blood and anguish. Good night. Bang, slams the door, off he goes. See you later. And he leaves behind sort of gibbering wrecks. You know, Sheila's crying quietly. Mrs. Burling's collapsed. Eric is a broken man. Burling could do nothing but go and get himself a drink. Priestley, as an inspector, has certainly been a catalyst for change here. I mistakenly said Priestley there, perhaps a Freudian slip. This almost feels like Priestley is using the character of the inspector as a megaphone to lecture, to preach to his middle-class audience, to perhaps turn their political affiliations in a more left-leaning direction. Where does all this power come from? This injection of drama? Well, this is pretty incredible rhetoric. It's pretty deep in terms of rhetorical devices, this speech. I won't go through them all right here and now. You can perhaps pick them out, but as well as the list I've made there, there's also direct address and many other little rhetorical devices as well. If you are into that and you need to look at that more specifically, here is some notes I made on a board with a recent class of mine, year 10s. Okay, so if you're year 11, then year 10s are coming up fast. You better get learning this stuff quickly. So if you want to see that in a little bit more detail, then just pause this and have a study. Right, on we go then. The curtain falls. I've called this technique. There is a dramatic device that Priestley uses at the end of every act where he leaves it on a bit of a cliffhanger. He leaves it at a moment of particular tension or intensity. At the top there, Act 1, you've got this little set piece where Gerald, the crafty Gerald Croft, is trying to hush it up and get Sheila to not reveal that he did know Eva Smith or knew her as Daisy Renton, and Sheila's saying we're not going to get away with this, and the inspector's got them banged to rights, and Gerald is like a rabbit in the headlights. Act 2 is a beautiful bit of dramatic tension. I think this is probably my favourite part of the whole play, when Mrs. Burling gets her comeuppance, and she sits there and judges and judges away, and more prejudice and more sort of lack of empathy and heart, and just cold-hearted, ruthless woman who's got no idea what her own kids are like, no ability to empathise for those less well off than herself, and the inspector just gives her more and more rope with which to hang herself, and says, "Oh, okay, no hushing up, eh? Public example of the young man, etc., etc." And then Mrs. Burling, the penny drops, and she has that moment of epiphany, where she realizes, oh no, this is my darling little boy who has impregnated this girl, and it was my grandchild whose life I have just helped to end before they were even born, and it's a hugely dramatic moment. And then at the end of the Act 3, or at the end of the play, of course, you've got this call from the police, and oh dear, they thought they were off the hook, and no, not so fast. A police inspector is coming around, because as Sheila has said, when they did think it was a hoax, it doesn't matter if it was a hoax or not. In some ways, they all did what they did, whether he was a real police inspector or not, or whether it was the same girl or not, or whether it was the same photo or not. In a sense, it doesn't matter. They all did what they did, and they treated a fellow human being in the manner in which they did. But now it looks like it is going to come back to bite them on the backside. So you get these build-ups, these moment of tensions, and then the curtain falls and drops very quickly. Okay then, an interposition, another little technique used by the inspector, or rather used by Priestley, and he gives us the inspector, is this tactic of interposing himself. So, i.e., that means putting himself between two objects, and in this case, it's the other characters and the photograph. This adds a certain amount of tension because we're kept in the dark, just like Gerald and Eric are here. You know, they're slightly nervous, they're on edge. It makes them question, it makes them wonder, and that's the same for the audience. Vicariously, we're sat there wondering what the photo looks like, wondering what their involvement is. I'm trying to think, do they have any guilt, etc., etc. And so this interposition keeps it tense on stage and keeps it tense in the audience as well. The other thing that, of course, this technique allows Priestley to do is to build up some tension towards the end, when the idea of the photograph is revisited, when the Burlings think they've cracked it and they think, that guy wasn't an inspector. Was it really the same photograph? No, maybe it wasn't. Maybe this means we don't have to feel bad about ourselves. And Burling and Mrs. Burling seize on this to try and make themselves feel better, and try to avoid taking responsibility. There's a lovely bit of irony there in that Priestley has Sheila as the sort of voice of reason, and she takes Eric with her. She's the sort of the conscience of the play in Act 3, and after the inspector has left, Priestley uses her to speak to the audience, like the megaphone, performing the same role that he used the inspector for, to sort of preach his socialist values of empathy and tolerance and community and so forth. And she's the adult. She's the one taking responsibility for her actions. Mr. Burling, Daddy, is acting like a little child, like a petulant kid, just going la 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 la, you know, sticking his fingers in his ears, metaphorically, saying he doesn't want to listen to it, doesn't want to engage at all. And the fact that the inspector has earlier interposed himself means that Priestley can then allow this added tension to be injected at the end, when we don't really know if it was the same photograph or not, or the same girl. Of course, Priestley's point, one that Sheila grasps, is that it doesn't really matter. They've still done what they've done, etc., etc., etc. The other thing that this technique allows Priestley to do is add a bit more tension into the dynamics between them. This is where the way Gould likes to go to work, as he says. You know, he can retain control of the power dynamic, and it can be a bit tense on stage, as he's not quite intimidating, but he's refusing to be pushed around himself, and he's the one calling the shots, and the stage directions just before we meet Inspector Gould, right at the start, is that he's a person of massiveness, solidity and purposefulness, and here he is, he's refusing to budge from the purpose. He's got a job to do. Okay, lastly is the narrative structure overall, the overall structure, as depicted or illustrated by this tension graph here in Inspector Calls. Now, what the technique Priestley uses is a series of mini climaxes. You keep thinking you have reached a point in the play where you understand who done it, basically, and you think you've cracked the case. So you first hear this awful death to this girl, and that she's burnt her insides out, and she's now lying on a slab, and the tension is going up with this. And then you find out what Burling did, kicking her out of the factory works, and the tension goes up again, and you think, right, he was the problem. This man is the criminal. He's almost a murderer. And then it's not just him. It gets more complicated. So the tension, kind of comes down a touch, in the sense that it's not just him, but it might be Sheila as well, and it goes up again, and then her guilt is diluted slightly, and then more tension is injected when we find out all of Gerald's shenanigans and his carry on with Eva Smith or Daisy Renton the summer before. And this continues through the character of Mrs. Burling up to Eric and his interrogation, and so it goes up and down and up and down and up and down, and Priestley keeps the audience thinking they've solved the case. And then it gets to the kind of high point of tension, the inspector's big speech, and then the tension gradually drops and drops and drops as they realise that Inspector Gould doesn't exist on the Bromley police force. Then it probably wasn't the same girl in their head, and then there haven't been any suicide cases when clever old Gerald goes off and rings the infirmary. But then, of course, right at the very end, the final twist, Mr. Burling is aghast as the police are on the phone and they're coming round, and there, bang, it shoots right the way up again, and the tension is sky high. And so Priestley is taking the characters in the play, but also us as an audience, on a journey from ignorance to light. So we got no idea who's done what at the beginning, and by the end we think we got a really clear picture of it, and we understand this step by step by step, incrementally, like in a good old-fashioned detective novel. Okay, so that's about that for various dramatic devices that Priestley has used in order to make his play more exciting, to make it more dramatic, more of a spectacle. I hope that's useful for you. Please be sure to like or subscribe or leave some comments just underneath this, and give me a clue as to how you think these videos could be better or more useful for your revision, and what you liked and didn't like. Okay, bye bye. Under pressure.